We are all about great causes here at Sex and Space. Today's shout-out is for Gender Minorities Aotearoa. They are a nationwide transgender organisation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is run by and for transgender people, including non-binary, intersex, and Irawhiti Takutapui people. They offer information, services, and wraparound support for transgender people of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds. The vision of Gender Minorities Aotearoa is for all transgender people to be empowered by a full range of choices across all aspects of their lives and to be able to participate fully in society. They do so much great work. Go check them out at genderminorities.com or at Gender Minorities Aotearoa on Facebook. They are Cole's charity of choice today.
Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hello, I'm Tim. I'm all on my own today as the lovely Jess is on maternity leave with their glorious and beautiful new baby. Welcome along to episode 10 of Sex and Space. Here we explore sex across all of its infinite dimensions. Just a few little bits of housekeeping before we launch into another epic conversation. We're going to be wrapping up season 1 after episode 12, so that means you've got 2 more to enjoy after this one. I mean, it seemed like a good number just to pause on, but we are going to be busy putting together season 2 for you. We've got some great guests coming up that I'm super excited about. And in my dear Jess's absence, we are going to be bringing you some excellent guest hosts too. So looking forward to sharing the mic with them. In yet more exciting news, I'm currently recording this intro in our very own brand new podcast studio. I'm actually sitting on the floor as it's completely devoid of furniture, but the carpet's in, and let me tell you, it is glorious. Once it's all finished, not only will our guests and ourselves sound fantastic, but we'll be able to add a video element to our podcast too, so you can see and enjoy us in the flesh, which I hope doesn't ruin it for anybody. Please make sure you're following us on the gram at sexandspace.com. That's sexandspace.com for all news about upcoming episodes and when season 2 is dropping. If you're just joining us, please check out our previous episodes. We've talked to drag kings, sex workers, therapists, advocates, and more. Coming up, we've got doctors, educators, and poet. So hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening. Right, let's get into it. This is the last episode that Jess recorded with me before scuttling off and having a baby, and is with the wonderful Cole Meyers. Cole is a writer, activist, and educator. They are the writer and co-producer for the recent and internationally and critically acclaimed film Rūrangi. He works as a consultant on trans and gender diverse narratives and inclusion in film, television, web series, and theatre, including Shortland Street, where he is currently a dialogue writer and previously a storyliner. He's a regular speaker and interviewee on trans representation and is passionately focused on supporting the authentic representation, creative opportunities, and powerful potential of gender diverse people. Hope you enjoy.
And now, the interview.
Amazing.
Oh, I wrote it myself. So. I can say what I want.
Yeah.
Say what you want. Is it all lies?
Well,
How did it sound?
not very passionate at all. I don't really give two tosses.
Yeah. So this is the thing you're leading with. Is this gorgeous, internationally critically acclaimed film, Rūrangi. Tell us about Rūrangi.
Well, there's an enormous question wrapped up in a starting off point, isn't it?
Yeah.
My heart. to sum it up really nicely and shortly. Yeah, it's something that I've kind of... Well, I mean, we've been working on it for a number of years now, but certainly something that is the culmination of many things that I've been thinking about for years over my, I say career, but even that feels very strange to say. I'm still working out this whole being an adult thing. Around, gender diverse narratives and kind of how to do them right, I guess. Certainly, and how to not do them terribly. Hollywood, listen up.
So, let's just drill into
Sorry
it.
to say that Hollywood in totality is probably not listening to this podcast.
Hey now, we have bold aspirations too.
We sure do, yeah.
Can you just drill into a little bit what gender diverse means when you're using that term? What does gender diverse mean to you?
I guess probably the easiest way to explain it is anyone that's not cisgender, and cisgender is someone whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. We talk about sex being assigned rather than sex being something which is innate, because it is something that is told to you or told to your parents by the medical professional based on, a number of factors, but generally the external characteristics of the body, rather than being something that is immutable or
yes I'm currently
or certain, or any of these terms.
Right.
It's all a whole lot more wiggly than people like to think it is, really.
I'm as we record this podcast, I am 36 weeks pregnant, and there's been a lot of do you want to know the sex, turn away from the scan now, because obviously from the scan they can tell this
of course.
thing. Or that's the presumption, is that it's really like...
You just act really shocked. It's like, whoa, really? Man, I'm amazed at the magic of these things. Like, you can see into the future.
So what you're saying is, child is born, basically doctor looks at genitals, assigns a sex, which is...
Here is all the things in your life that are possible for you forever. And that's that end.
Okay. And so if somebody gets assigned something that they don't agree with, then and identifies as something other than that sex, then they qualify as gender diverse. Qualify. But in your definition,
there's a rigorous exam.
Yeah.
Achieved merit and excellence. Gender diverse is kind of like a broader term than the term transgender, because some people who identify as gender diverse don't identify with the words transgender when talking about themselves, but they don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth either.
Okay.
So we kind of tend to say trans and gender diverse, or gender diverse.
Okay.
But gender diverse,
that group of people.
Gender diverse is more all-encompassing.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I don't want to rail on Hollywood too much. Maybe I do.
Go for it.
What are they getting wrong?
This podcast is only like an hour long.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess probably the first one is casting Scarlett Johansson. I've actually railed on Scarlett Johansson twice today, so that's all of my meanness to her for today.
So casting her in a role,
in a trans role, and it's kind of sad that that's give people some pats on the back for doing that right, as in cast you in a story about you. In the same way that it's kind of sad to have to, in the past, to have to be like, good job, you cast a Chinese person to play a Chinese person.
Or you cast a black person and
exactly.
put down your blackface makeup.
And kind of what Hollywood and has been doing as far as casting trans roles for pretty much only up until very recently will be looked at, I am very sure, in the future in the same way that casting roles of people of colour with white people will be looked at.
And it's not just about the actors involved, though, is it? It's also the narratives that are being told and those other elements. Are they missing out on that as well?
I mean, there's kind of a few parts to it. One, there are so few roles that are actually available to trans actors to begin with.
Yeah.
So to take away another, like one of them by casting with a cis person, is pretty stink.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the largest one is that. Well, no. Then the next one is, you're getting so much more authentic portrayals of characters if you're casting authentically, obviously. Someone could spend half a year learning to be trans and not get anywhere near the depth and nuance that a performance just comes naturally to someone who's that's their lived experience. You don't need to go away and study that when that's me at the supermarket. And the biggest one is, though, that the damaging ideas around trans people are often perpetuated through the casting decisions for trans women in particular. By casting cis men to play trans women is continuing this idea that trans femininity is in itself a performance.
Yeah.
And that when we see cis men going up on award stages and things like that with full beards and accepting awards for playing women, this idea that trans women are just playing a role, are just men in dresses, and those kind of ideas lead very much directly to things like cis men being attracted to trans women and finding out that they're trans, panicking and enacting violence against trans women. And when you look at the rate of harassment, violence and death amongst trans women, particularly trans women of colour, like anything that you're possibly doing to
like perpetuate those.
To perpetuate that is so damaging.
Yeah.
All of these things, I talk a lot about it, and I go, it's not taking it too far to say that stopping these kind of negative portrayals saves lives, and on the flip side, making more positive portrayals and creating more positive opportunities for trans people is saving lives.
And building in a number of tangible ways. You mean like exposing non-gender diverse people to an authentic experience and creating understanding and empathy, that sort of thing?
Yes, but I think more importantly than that is around, it's not just stopping cis people from doing violence against trans people. It's giving trans people enough empowerment and enough ideas about the possibility and the desirability of their continued existence to stop to stop us doing violence against ourselves.
Right, yeah.
The rates of self-harm and suicide attempts amongst trans and gender diverse people is phenomenally high. I think there was a study in the States a few years ago that put the suicide attempt rate at 41%.
Right, so it's actually about showing...
And I would feel like that's probably under...
Oh,
representing
Yeah,
it.
the New Zealand one that we were looking at, counting ourselves, put it at something like 79% of attempted suicides in New Zealand
Yeah.
in the trans and non-binary community. That
Yeah.
just blew my mind. 79%.
Yeah.
It's 4 out of every 5
Yeah.
trans people you meet.
Mm.
That's outrageous.
Yeah.
And you think that that's because there aren't many... I don't know, like, it's not about seeing role models, is it, or opportunities, or it's just about that?
I mean, for me, I didn't come out as trans till quite a lot later in life than a lot of people. It's certainly a lot of people these days, young people, are like, and it's because they are actually seeing trans people.
Yeah.
You know, it's not... It's not even just seeing, like, awesome, amazing portrayals of trans people. It's seeing trans people full stop.
Yeah.
I had no idea that was even a thing. And so all these feelings that I was having about myself and about my body and about, you know, my future and all these things like that, there just wasn't anything there. The path just stopped.
Yeah. And it's still... quite narrow as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're still not seeing the complex, you know, positive, authentic portrayals that we need to be seeing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why creating this was so important.
Yeah.
When I kind of came on board to begin with, I had this, like, list of, like, multiple pages long about, you know, of all the things that I didn't want to see, but probably more importantly, all the things I did want to see, or that were just so desperately needed to be seen. And things like, you know, loving family relationships and, like, healthy, loving romantic and sexual relationships and community and connection and meaningful engagement and meaningful work, employment. Life past any kind of coming out or transition story. You know, so often when we are seeing trans stories, they're only transition stories, and it's this idea that the only interesting thing about trans people, the only thing about trans people is our transness, but actually, like, you know, have all the other things that human beings have as well, and that going on in our lives.
Yeah.
I made that sentence so long that I forgot what I was, where it started.
You're talking about the huge list of things that you wanted to see, and
yeah,
that was so important.
Because I know, like, from my own experience, what seeing something like Rūrangi would have meant to me when I was younger.
Yeah.
Have you had that feedback from the trans and gender diverse community so far?
Yeah, which has been the most kind of important and powerful feedback, certainly, for me. And I've said that the whole way through, and I think we've all kind of known that was our bar, was not so much if, like, our critics' feedback was, you know, phenomenal or anything like that, but it's been really heartening that we have had some incredibly positive feedback. But whether the people that, you know, certainly I was making it for, were feeling themselves represented, and feeling like, that it did offer some hope. I mean, especially for young people. Later this year, we're actually going to show it at a youth hui for queer and trans young people, and just like the excitement that I have over them seeing it is tops, you know, showing it at international film festivals and things like that, because I'm just like, these are the people who I made it for, but these are the people who need to see it. So
if we get critically acclaimed, it's like trans acclaimed is the
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is it's like, you know, all the, you know, acclaim from critics and things like that goes towards getting it out there further, and more people who need to see it seeing it and benefiting from it. So.
Yeah, because you have an amazing website alongside this film, Rūrangi.com, Rurangi.com, which
Thanks
is that's okay. Not everyone can spell well.
I can't spell so well out loud, or in my head. I have to like close my eyes and think really like.
I'm here for you.
Well, there you go.
I was just going to say, on that website you have a part of it that's kind of really about that mission statement and the values, and we were looking into that and kind of going, oh, it's not just that you've cast trans characters in trans actors in trans roles. It actually goes quite a lot deeper than that. It kind of goes through the whole production process, it seemed to us. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It was always very important for all of us that it wasn't just a case of what we were producing, just like the product that came out at the end, which you know is obviously really important as well, and that's what our young people see, and that's what they get benefit from. But it was about the whole process being something that was empowering and valuing trans voices as well, and so kind of that came in so many different ways, and I'm probably going to forget a bunch of them, so do go to that website because I should probably go to that website and study up again. Some of the kind of ones from the very beginning that we had was that all our trans roles were cast with trans actors, that we had compulsory cast and crew gender and sexuality training for everyone.
Okay.
Because it's that thing of like, it's all well and good saying, you know, we're only going to bring trans people in to play these roles and things like that, but I feel like so often that's where things stop. And, you know, if you're bringing people in to work on something, like, you have a responsibility to look after them and to make sure that they're respected and that they're safe and comfortable. And, you know, even if you're just thinking from a, like, how can I get the most money for my, you know, value for my money point of view, you go, you want to give people everything that they need to do their job well. And funny that, but actually, like, you know, people feeling safe and comfortable and respected helps them do their job. Their job well. Like, just FYI to anyone wanting some sweet business skills from me, who doesn't know much about business skills.
But you know a lot about safety.
Yeah, and another thing was around, you know, when we were looking for like trying to find trans people for various other positions of responsibility and decision making and things like that, and we're struggling to find things like trans directors or producers who had the availability or the expertise of like the level that we required to make this, and not finding them out there in New Zealand, or not finding them out there that we had access to, and going, well, okay, things don't just stop there then. Like, what's, you know, because I feel like that's another thing that kind of Hollywood does, is it goes, oh, well, we couldn't find anyone. Well, that's it then. Like, and then just kind of carries on, and you go, yeah, well, what are you doing though to like make sure that that's not the case for next time? Otherwise this problem is just going to keep happening. because there are so many barriers in the way of, trans people and gender diverse people having access to the training or the opportunities or networking opportunities and all that sort of stuff, to be able to get to that point in their career. And so we had 6 paid creative internship opportunities for gender diverse people to train in those areas.
That's so cool.
And and then hopefully that being the case of they can move up and take higher roles in future Rūrangi seasons and which is exciting. There's like multiple things and I always forget which.
I know which one I really love, which is the breaking hierarchies one, because I've been on film sets before, and that thing of like the decision, it really sits at the top and everybody just, like, it's one of the oldest hierarchies still remaining, isn't it? The film set. And I loved this line that you had on the website, which was like, it's about context over control. So the people who the decision affects are in the room to voice their position while the decision is being made, and that like there is that understanding right, that their like contextual experience is just as valid as their position in the chain of power.
I guess probably the most obvious one is around the internship program, which was like, we called it an internship program, but it was kind of like a sharing of knowledge, and it was this recognition that while our HODs were the ones with the knowledge in that area of things, that actually our gender diverse interns were the ones who had the expertise and the experience in being trans and what that lived experience is. And so, just a good example is probably the art department, and being like, while our art intern was learning about, how to be an art director, our art director was deferring to our trans intern as far as things like, what does a trans activist's house look like? And what should I put on the walls in there? Rather than it being like, you do this and you do this and you do this, and that, power and I mean, nervousness, certainly, if it was my experience, about being like, actually, that's not quite, or that's really problematic, and or that's, any trans person's going to see that and be like, haha, yeah, right. Which, I've watched films like that where you go and, some trans guys like, oh yeah, I'm hardcore and I'm lifting weights and I'm injecting my testosterones every day in my arm, and you're there being like, no, that's not where it goes. Oh God, that's not how, like, what are you even, and just laughing about it. And I mean, you've got to laugh at it, otherwise you kind of have a little bit of a cry about the fact that it's like, in order for this to have made it to the screen, to the cinema, to my eyeballs, to laugh at it, like, at no point during this whole process was anyone like me empowered to say, hey, wait a sec. Lol, no. Which, that's the kind of implicit education that comes from things like that. It's not necessarily the stuff that stands out so much. It's the going, no one like me was trusted enough with our own stories to be involved in making decisions about our own stories. Which was, that thing about breaking down hierarchies, like making sure that we could kind of do everything within our power, recognizing that there was things that were outside our power, but everything within our power to kind of make sure that, the people who had the knowledge got to share the knowledge, and the people that decisions affected, got to be there making those decisions. I mean, another probably another good example is around wardrobe, and that rather than treating it as in, wardrobe says you wear this and that's it, making these things a negotiation around what do we need to achieve with wardrobe, what do we need to achieve through the script, and that we then see, and actually what do you need for feeling comfortable and safe and confident in your body. And it was interesting because sort of once we started to think about these things for looking after our gender diverse actors, it was kind of like, well, one, we don't want them to necessarily feel like they're being like othered by being like, you go off to that room and you have your talk with the wardrobe department and whatnot, and everyone else just suck it up. But going like, actually, it's kind of nice for everyone to have some input in these things, because trans people don't have a monopoly on, body image issues. And everyone, deserves an opportunity to feel as safe and comfortable and confident enough to do their best work. And so, we were having these conversations with all the cast, and conversations around like, how do you, is there anything as far as your body being touched, or body parts, or ways of being interacted with in your body that you don't feel comfortable with, or that you feel unsafe with, and then having our cis actors say, and I'm so new to this industry, but to have them say to us like, thank you, because no one has ever asked me if and just like, I remember the moment the first person said that to me, and just being like so struck by the fact that it's like, where are our conversations around bodily autonomy and consent and things like that? And at that level, like, yes, we're opening up these conversations which need to be had so much more and more, and there's just such a toxic culture still there. It's not all fixed or anything around sexual harassment and sexual assault, but actually at a really basic level, like, just, is this thing in the script saying your body is touched in this way? Like, are there ways of making that more of a negotiation rather than a directive or an order? And I think it feels like it makes you a better creator if you are kind of staying flexible and staying fluid about these sorts of things. And maybe, I don't know, sometimes I feel like my activist side is showing a bit too much, and maybe there are probably some, writers who would be like, no, you just do whatever I fucking say in my script and suck it up. But, for me as a writer, I'm like, no, please. Like, if I'm writing stuff that are making people feel unsafe, like, or there are ways that the same thing can be achieved in a way that everyone feels safe and respected, then doesn't it pay to try?
Yeah, seems pretty revolutionary to me.
Yeah, it's funny that because you just mentioned your activism, and so, I mean, now you're sort of New Zealand's most prominent,
That's good, I'll write that in my next
bio. There we go, write in your next bio. New Zealand's most prominent trans storyteller is how I think about you. Not to say that there aren't other trans storytellers out there that haven't had the same light on them.
Yeah.
But is that a lot of pressure?
No.
To be at the front of the boat?
I'm sure my anxiety levels would say one thing to that question. Yeah, it is. And it has been quite a journey for me to work with that, rather than, because that can just like make you so overwhelmed with feeling the weight of the responsibility that sometimes you just end up not being able to do anything. And so kind of recognizing that actually I can do as much as I can, and I can keep learning and keep being very, very aware of where I'm still learning and, who I need to be learning from and what spaces I'm not even aware that I need learning.
Because you didn't always do storytelling, right?
No, I mean, when I first came out as trans, I was very, I guess, focused on activism in the classical sort of idea of activism, like more explicit educational work and things like marches and things like that. And it got to a point where it was not healthy for me. I was feeling so much pressure and the weight of so many kind of people who, and part of it was being fresh to the whole idea, and so not having a lot of those self-care structures in place, but feeling like I was holding so many people's lives in my hands and that I couldn't breathe or sleep or anything because I would miss a phone call from someone saying that they were going to harm themselves and that would be my responsibility, and that, anytime I fly on a plane these days and they say the thing about, put your own oxygen mask on before you help anyone else, and it's like, yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense because you're not actually helping anyone if you pass out before you can get their oxygen mask on to begin with.
Sure.
And so I did have to take some time away, and I told myself that I was going to focus on my own kind of creative stuff, because at that point I'd recognized just how much my own creative work was refilling the cup that was being emptied by activism, and then getting a little bit of distance from it and focusing on my own acting work and doing my own writing, and just, I guess, realizing how much activism was in me just following my heart and following what it was that I really wanted to do with my life. And I'd had this kind of idea for so long that I kind of could either do what I loved or be who I was, and that I couldn't actually do both. I mean, particularly in relation to acting, and this idea that I never wanted that, and this is only in hindsight that I realize this, but like looking back and thinking that I never wanted to make a name for myself as not myself. That I didn't want to go and pursue acting and then be successful at acting and then be like, fuck, I've made this whole portfolio of work, or I've made this whole like successful career and no one knows who I even really am, because I haven't let myself open up that door in my head to who I really am yet. But taking that time to work on my own creative stuff and realizing that I did need to do that, and that following that, rather than just, being this martyr for the, marching down the street, was activist work, in itself, but that I couldn't separate what I was writing about and activist work. There was, it's just, and that's not everyone. I have done some work which has just been pure like escapist sci-fi brilliance, I say brilliance, not really. But, you know, so much of it is around exploring identity and is around exploring trans experiences and realizing just how much that I can still be doing as much good or even more good through putting those things out there as I could be through explicit educational work.
Yeah, it seems there's a lot of value to come out of this kind of change of direction, you know, in terms of the people that you get to see your work and have the responses you're talking about, but also that whole education and thing about the, you know, that you did with the rest of the cast and crew, and that whole.
But even getting away from like education in that like more clear-cut sense of things, actually before we even get to education, we need to build empathy. You know, because people actually don't listen or don't remember anything about what if you're teaching them the right words for things. If they like don't care because I don't give a fuck about these people.
Yeah.
And you know, so much of that kind of work is going in through the mind, and there's so many mental defenses that people have against new information.
Yeah.
If it doesn't fit with their view of how things are and how things always have been and how things always should be, I put my conservative voice on to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
right.
talkback radio voice.
Yeah.
Long time listener, first time here. And whereas things like narrative and you know, at the core of things, Kaz's story is a pretty simple and universal story about someone feeling shame and feeling alienation and
prodigal
feeling
son returns.
yeah,
story kind
exactly.
of.
It's
Yeah,
like,
right.
you know, I think about it and I've seen that lots of times. Like, you know, someone's gone away from small town for a period of time and have changed quite a lot and come back and had to reconnect with their past.
Yep.
Like, you know, it's quite a classic
Classic
story.
Yeah.
But, you know, we haven't seen it in this context and because it is, you know, something that we've seen a lot, that it can kind of go through in the heart, you know, you do feel like this person is someone who's feeling shame, and I have felt shame. This person is feeling connection, and, you know, I like connection in my life, and all of those sorts of things like that, you know, to the point that then you can go, once we've established we're all human beings and we're all worthy of respect and love and have all had hard shit happen and want good stuff to happen, like, then we can sort of get to here's the best language to describe these experiences that people are having and things like that, because you actually established the soil for that to actually grow.
And now, this.
It began as a day or comparable space-time unit like any other at Barbarella's.
So, there I was, stuck in a Korean orgiastic convocation without a node chief.
I'm smacked you offered to cover the long weekend. What did you do?
What could I do? I flipped the nearest Poltronic onto its back and hid amongst its congees until the gong sounded. Then lasered a hole in the obstruct and got the hell out of there.
Oof, close. If they'd found you without a sheath, they'd probably have fed you to the Thornac.
That would have been the least of my problems. I was still wearing my dom harness from the subject group the night before.
Dodged a felonial projectile there, didn't you?
I'll say, I should have listened to my stroker and not offered weekend cover.
Well, one of their heads has always been quite level.
And you know what they say, Flabbly Dobvarani.
Classic Knob Shatani. On my side. Shit!
What?
It's a Partho funnel, dear.
Really?
Yeah.
Shit.
Cassie Gallic, Inspector Blimfetti, Interplanetary Reaper Ministry. My assistant Varnick.
Tashi Delic.
Step away from the console. We do not wish our presence to be announced before we carry out our inspection.
Your pleasure is our business.
Spare me the commercial. The Ministry hasn't forgotten your last inspection. We eventually found our auditors working in your power trip fantasy section.
No one forced them.
Yeah, that's a different section.
Enough. Prepare to be thoroughly scrutinized.
If anyone else said that, it would be hot.
I'm warning you.
Will Barbarella's survive a vindictive audit? Does it conform to ISO 9000? Find out in the next episode of...
Barbarella's, your pleasure is our business.
And now, to more weapons-grade content.
You talked before about the gender and sexuality education, is that what you call it? And I actually, years ago, had the privilege of undergoing this gender and sexuality education, I think. I don't know how similar it looks, but at the time...
The
prototype of this, because...
My first small class.
I was privileged enough to... this is like quite a while ago, actually. I was a cis actor at the time, cast in a trans role in one of your theatre works, and we did this gender and sexuality education, which really blew my mind, and I think part of it is exactly what you're talking about. It was education, but it was empathy driven first. So I was sitting there with a bunch of trans people, hearing their lived and embodied experiences, and that just floored me. I just remember sitting there weeping in this workshop, being like, holy shit! I had no idea what I was on board for at that time, and it was honestly a very critical turning point for me in both understanding and then wanting to express my gender diversity. So thank you for that.
You're most welcome.
But also,
well, I must say that actually you got the Cole gender diversity training, whereas we actually got the incredible Inside Out to come in and run our gender and sexuality training.
And have you been involved with them? Is that?
Yeah, that's the hui that I'm going to run workshops and do some. Just knock something over. Audio equipment. Soon actually. Workshops and stuff. But they were the ones that came in and ran that training for us, and they were incredible. And shout out to Inside Out. Hire them for stuff.
Is that a good point of like, if there are people listening who are like, how can I bring this kind of training into my workplace? Maybe they've got someone in their workplace who has recently, identified differently from what people previously thought, and like, how can we support them? Is that the best thing to do, to contact something like Inside Out to get that support?
Yeah, Inside Out are amazing for that kind of stuff. Okay. And if they aren't available to do it, we'll definitely be able to point you in the right direction.
Okay.
For maybe somewhere closer by.
Yeah.
Or oh god. But certainly, like, it would have been lovely if I could have run, a similar kind of thing that we did all those years ago. But there was quite too many people, and also I was already wearing too many hats that were very, very fighting on my head at that point.
Yeah, you're very busy.
Yeah.
You talked, obviously, I've had the privilege of hearing your kind of embodied experience as a trans person, and you've talked a lot about that as the core of why it's so important that we have this visibility. Are you open to talking about what that embodied experience of being trans has been like for you? Because I know it's different for every trans person, surely.
What? We're not all just this
You're not
one...
the same.
Yeah, and I guess whenever I talk about things like this, I'm always very clear to be like, this is just me as one person, and I don't represent the experience of everyone. And also, don't take it for granted that every trans person will feel comfortable talking to you about this, and don't actually just ask random trans people stuff that you wouldn't ask anyone. Like, it's like, as an absolute baseline, it's like, if you wouldn't ask a cis person, don't ask a trans person about it. Like, it's funny, but we don't actually go, can you please describe your genitals to me in explicit detail? just random people that you meet. This tends to not go down super well.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever asked you to?
No, no one's ever asked me. Yeah.
Well, you're missing
Yeah.
out.
I am, yeah.
I know, I was like, who's going to say it?
Yeah. You're not.
Yeah.
Just to be very clear. Yeah, I guess I don't even know where to start with a question like that. I mean, I'll just start where kind of my mind's at the moment that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and that's been around the interplay, I guess, of trans experience and dysphoria and eating disorders, because it's been kind of, I won't say New Year's resolution because I hate New Year's resolutions, but it's been something that I've been working on recently, has been about being more open about talking about my experience with eating disorders. And it's also something that isn't talked about nearly enough. And actually trans people, here's some just, factoid of the day. If you forget everything else, I hope that this is not the only thing that you remember, but if you do, I'll take something over nothing. Trans people actually are 4 to 5 times more likely than any other group to suffer from eating disorders. Why? Well, I mean, there is a lot of interplay with the way eating disorders and bodies and gender kind of interact. I know for me, and again, hindsight, but looking and going, the things that I was so hateful of that kind of started the original drive, towards wanting to alter my body and with food and eating were gendered elements of the body. And I think, we absolutely gender fat feminine and we gender muscle masculine. And so if you're already feeling traumatized by puberty and the changes that kind of puberty enacts upon the body when it's not the way that you want your body to go, and it's causing the world in general to treat you even more out of sync with how you see yourself. And I'll say, even if you're not aware that that's the reason why you feel so out of sync with yourself, because I did just think until I was in, early 20s even, that I was just a really fucked up girl. Because there was no understanding that transness was a thing that existed, and so it wasn't, a potential option in my head as to why I was feeling the way I was feeling. But yeah, certainly. And then later, as a non-binary person, again feeling like damaged by both, masculine cultural ideals and feminine cultural ideals. And, and I don't know if that's something that's ever going to go away for me, because it's just been so deeply ingrained, certainly around female socialization and body image. And I did a slam poem many years ago, like early on and things, that was talking about how that it didn't matter whether certain body parts were body parts, whether I wanted to exist on my person or not, and yet I was still having weird kind of envy when I would see pictures in magazines. And this because I just, again, I'm only talking about my own experience, but because it was so drummed into me that was what you were supposed to look like if you were XYZ. And just realizing how bizarre that was, and just the depth that kind of socialization and damage around ideals can go. Can't even again remember where the question started, but that's something around embodiment. That's right, embodiment that I sort of been thinking a lot about lately, and I think the fact that it's really important with eating disorder recovery that the needs of trans people, like, and even at the most basic level of, can I identify as not male or female on a form at an eating disorder, recovery, place, it seems, there's the minimum requirement. Do I exist here? Can I exist here in this recovery space? But that the really unique needs, I think, there around the interplay between dysphoria and recovery. And that maybe things that, there were times certainly for me where from a harm reduction perspective as well, there were times for me where the harm that would occur to me or that I would enact upon myself, based on the extremes of dysphoria, were more than harm that would come to me through continuing to be engaged in. I'm being so diplomatic about the way that I'm trying to phrase this, but the harm that would be caused by continuing to engage in certain eating disorder behaviours.
Yeah, okay.
And so it was a case of yes, ideally, I wouldn't have to choose between these things, but that maybe right now, in this context of my life or in this context of cultural context, it's safer for me to continue to engage in this behaviour than it is for me to not.
Yeah, wow.
Which I don't know if that's.
And that feels, you're talking about it like this is very current. You're not talking about this as past. The way you're talking about it.
Some of it is past. Some of it is current, certainly. And that's the thing about talking about why there needs to be more education amongst eating disorder recovery professionals, I think, around gender identity and that interplay, because on one hand, my dysphoria is less when I'm at a lower weight.
Wow.
And maybe and this is not the case for me, but it might, I know it's the case for other trans people because I've talked to them about it, that the damage, either externally or internally, the harm that might come there from that dysphoria is more than harm that might come from continuing to be at that, exist at that weight. And so that's, and that's, I feel it's wrong to just put that on trans people to somehow be you're supposed to be strong enough to deal with that, whatever, that. And so often we try and individualize these problems, and actually it's the people that are dealing with these things are not we're the symptom of a cultural sickness.
Yeah.
Rather than specifically sick ourselves.
Yeah. No, it seems like it's you're absolutely right. It is the cultural sickness is the weight obsession.
Yeah.
And the the stereotyping that happens with that, and then
the
unfortunately
gender.
you've got this other other thing at play
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. So it seems like you're
and I mean
a
that's
target-rich
the main
environment.
thing as well, is it's being there's a cultural sickness around the way in which we enforce gender.
Yeah.
that's rather than any kind of thing about trans people are wrong.
Yeah.
Is there a layer in there that's about passing in order to avoid external violence? You know, like being like,
Absolutely.
If I'm a low weight, then I'm less likely to be attacked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
in the same way that, you know, there are lots of non-binary people who kind of try and, you know, do things so that they are read, you know, in one of two binary options rather than what actually feels comfortable for them. And I know that I've, you know, certainly done that, and I still do that. And it's not a case of being like, you trans people should be, you know, stronger than that, to be yourself despite, you know, whatever like that. It's like, do not put that on us, that we should choose between, like, you know, violence being done to ourselves and being ourselves. Like, you know, that's not our choice to make. That's your choice as a culture. Well, I'd say, you know, your choice, but I mean, like, that's a cultural sickness.
So if I'm just thinking about, like, maybe there's someone listening who is in a family environment, they've got a child coming through puberty, their child is starting to behave in some of these ways you're talking about, that they've got eating disordered behaviours, and they're also kind of questioning their gender, and there's lots of things going on there. What is the best, like, how can we start to, at a really small level, break down that cultural sickness so that it doesn't live in that home? Like, how could that family ally that person, in your opinion?
I mean, anything that is breaking down those, like, any kind of gender rigidity or any kind of gender stereotypes or gender roles is going to then have a knock-on effect if gender is a contributing aspect to an eating disorder. And that's not saying that gender is a contributing factor to every trans person's eating disorder. Sometimes they can be totally unrelated.
Sure.
But, you know, things like getting education yourself and, you know, providing a variety of trans kind of possibilities and depictions and positive narratives, and, you know, asking other gender diverse people in your life to give you recommendations as to what's good and things like that, knowing that you can't necessarily judge whether something is going to be a positive, you know, depiction or not. We don't know often, if we're not of that group, whether something would contribute positively or not. Doing a lot of self-work, I guess, around the ways that you talk about bodies or talk about food or talk about good and bad and who deserves what. And, you know, because we've got so much, again, as a culture, we've got so much judgment around what food is good, what food is bad. There's, you know, even the idea that health is supposed to be this thing, you know, is a moral thing, you know, or that is something that everyone should be striving to achieve as their most important thing in their life. Actually, sometimes it's not. And it doesn't have to be, and no one should be shamed or judged, you know, based on whether that... I kind of feel like I'm confusing lots of different realms in my head at the moment, but, you know, this, because that's quite, as someone, you know, with chronic illnesses and disabilities, the idea that my most important criteria that I judge myself in my life, or that other people judge me in my life based on, is whether I'm well or not. Obviously, that's really problematic. You know, and going back to how you can, you know, help young people and things in your life.
Or older people too. We always talk about,
Yeah.
but, you know, I mean... Yeah,
I guess really doing a lot of that self-examination about, you know, and it's good for you and your own, like, relationship to your body and your health and your your experiences in the world and you know, pleasure and embodiment and all of those kind of things like that, and then in, you know, creating and enforcing and even just being aware of your own boundaries and your own desires and things like that, but then, you know, and modeling that so that other people see that, you know, being aware of and caring about those things is something that everyone deserves. Bodily autonomy and pleasure. But then, you know, how we may be acting in ways that are harming other people's ideas about their bodies and about what's good or bad or worthy or unworthy. And, you know, I guess not falling into, because it's so easy to do with all of these kind of discussions in around, like, blaming yourself and then just becoming stagnant around it, or feeling like you're being blamed and becoming defensive and then shutting down. You know, you can only have learned what you can have learned in your life and you've had exposure to, and actually, you know, it's not a judgment on you that you've not had exposure to certain things in your life, because, you know, you've not experienced certain marginalized identities. Like, you know, it's too easy to become defensive about those things, and that just stops any kind of learning and any kind of growth. Whereas it's a lot harder, but it's so much richer to be able to go, yeah, actually, I was really not aware of that, and I probably did hurt some people through not knowing that thing. But where can I grow and where can I change and learn from that? And you just, I know I think about it myself when I'm starting to fall into that defensive space. I go, you know, actually, when I've seen other people kind of admit and recognize and, you know, learn and grow from experiences like that, I respect that. You know, I'm not going, oh man, what a loser, like, why would you ever admit that you did something less than perfectly, like, get out of
People
town.
choose to grow.
No, exactly.
Rather than, like,
you know, I
collapse in
respect
shame.
that. The same way that if someone tells me no because they're in, like, know their own boundaries and they're enforcing, you know, what they need, you know, or they're doing some self-care or something like that, I'm like, hell yeah, keep doing that. Thank you for saying no to me. Because it also gives me, like, it gives, you know, me the ability or to feel like I can do that and other people aren't judging me negatively as well. Like, it gives me a bit of a boost to do what I need to do as well.
Yes, I love that. Love that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you sort of talk about when we talk about the advice that people can take on board to maybe if their kids are going through something or people they know are going through something. It sounds so much like good advice for everybody to actually not just judge people on, you know, how perfectly they fit in a particular gendered box or how fit they are or all those kind of things. You're like, oh, hang on a minute, this is actually...
Because that's the
really
thing
simple
is trans people and gender diverse people are the people who suffer the most from rigid gender expectations and gender roles, but everyone is fucked over by that. Yeah. You know, the number of men who feel like their only outlets for feelings is heterosexual relationships, substances, or violence, you know, and how much of life that means that you miss out on.
Totally, yeah.
And how the depth of connections and, you know, and which are the things that you're looking for.
That's what everyone's actually...
with those, you know, with those other things, you know, is what you're trying to find, you know, some real, you know, human connection. Yeah. And to feel like just because we've got these incredibly outdated and never true, you know, ever in any culture,
Yeah.
never true. Ideas about gender is really sad, and I hope that through what's a really crappy and difficult experience for trans people, that maybe one of the good things that comes out of that in a larger sense is everyone going, wait a second, just some specific things around pronoun stuff, which, because I always get asked this, and I think it's actually really useful for anyone, if you're struggling with around using different pronouns for someone who's asking you to use different pronouns for them, or if you're struggling with the whole concept of they, them as a pronoun for a single person rather than a group of people, which some people like to get real, God, the number of people that go, but that's just not that's grammatically correct.
Right.
And it's like, one, that's not even true. And two, it's the same people that go, you can't use that word in a slam poem, that's not a real word. And I was like, where do you think words come from? They're not dropped from a box in the sky, they come from use. We create them because there's a need for them, and we create them. So even if it was just that, here is this group of people who are now finally feeling safe enough maybe to start to make their existence known. Not that that's true, but in itself. But, even if that was the case, still don't be a dick.
Sounds like a very specific story and a rabbit hole that I would love to dive down.
But
you were going.
Oh yeah.
What were you saying?
But it's two specific pieces of advice, and both of these are ones that don't require you to fuck up at the person's face who you're trying to get it right for. Because so often it's our only places of practice are those kind of situations, which is that's really, it would be good if we had other places to practice. And so one of them is practicing breaking down those ideas in your head around the automatic assumption that what someone looks like is the pronoun that they use. And so, often we tell stories about things like, I was in a cafe and these two women were said blah, 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 or, I was standing behind these dudes at the rugby and things like that, and going, whenever you can, catching yourself and going, actually, did I ask those people what gender they identified as?
Yeah.
Did I ask them, and even if I did I ask them what pronouns they use? And just kind of not practicing going I was sitting beside two people in a cafe that were talking about going to the gym and Zumba and something. Or I was behind this person in the bakery and they said, you go first, whatever.
Because you can't know gender
because
by looking.
one, we're practicing it ourselves, and we're also modelling it to anyone else who goes, why did you say that? Were they men or women? And you go, actually, interesting, let's have a little conversation.
I don't know,
My other piece of specific advice is about practicing pronouns with someone, or using pronouns for someone when they're not there, is to practice saying their name, which again, let's just say the name that they ask you to call them, rather than the name that you maybe have known them their whole life, or that you prefer for them, or whatever. Practicing saying their name and their pronoun as a one word rolled together.
Example.
Cole he.
Okay.
Cole he, Cole he, Cole he. Because so much of these pronoun usage is actually automatic, rather than that you're specifically trying to be a dick. And if you're training your brain to kind of because that's the way we use that pronoun generally. We don't use it to someone's face. We use it when we're talking about that person to someone else. So if you're telling a story to Tim, you're when I was with Cole, he, is generally almost always the way in which we use that phrasing. And so if you're practicing rolling it together, it will kind of help trigger that automatic response in your head.
Such a lovely little home exercise.
I worked that one out myself.
Oh, straight from the most prominent trans storyteller in Aotearoa.
Here's a few exercises to take away after this podcast.
That's amazing. Thank you for it. It's such a gift.
Can I ask a couple of things that I struggle with that might be helpful for the listeners. And you may or may not be able to shed some light, but it's really about when you're having conversations with people, and it's maybe not just about this subject matter actually, but other subject matters where you don't necessarily feel that you are almost qualified to be having this kind of conversations. I don't know if it's like there's like a point where you're like, I'm not sure that I should be going down this rabbit hole. Am I perhaps informed enough? How is there a sort of...
Oh, you mean that in a conversation you're the more knowledgeable of the two, but you don't feel like you're knowledgeable enough?
I don't know. I think it's more that, like, sometimes I feel like I'm not qualified to even partake in a conversation, and I'll listen and try and learn. And then on the flip side, I can be having a conversation with, say, an older relative, and I try and remember the context in which they've grown up and maybe been exposed to the subject matter, but I then get frustrated at their sort of lack of understanding of my perspective, and do you know what I mean? And
yeah.
So I guess you're the best. So the moment when you're the best gateway to the queer community, but you're like, but
yeah,
I'm it.
I guess
like
really,
that?
it's the question is how to kind of build that space for people to ask daft questions, maybe, and instead of kind of, I don't know, shaming them because they asked a silly question. How do you take people on that journey a little bit and kind of help guide them along? And I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It does like very much depend. Like it is absolutely something that you get better at, and that is absolutely a learning experience.
Yeah.
And so I guess not like number one is don't beat up on yourself if it doesn't go perfectly.
Yeah.
Because you're just learning too.
That's it, right?
But I guess the thing that I kind of advise to lots of people, because something that often happens kind of when, well, I say often, that can happen when people have just come out as, you know, and they're really amped up about kind of being an activist and things like that, is can get quite hardcore about making sure, like getting really frustrated really quickly when people get stuff wrong, and feeling like when people get stuff wrong that it's because that they're like not trying, or that they're deliberately trying to be antagonistic.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing that I've certainly realised myself is that, like, the majority of the time, people aren't actually trying to be assholes.
Yeah.
Like, they're genuinely getting stuff wrong because they haven't had exposure to that. And I think, you know, remembering that, like, even if you have to kind of be like, remember, like, you know, not everyone's had the same experiences as me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, not everyone can be
breathe,
super knowledgeable and awesome as me.
Yeah.
And, you know, coming at it from a, like, I mean, this is how I might point out to someone that they're using the wrong pronouns for someone. It would be like, hey, you might actually not know, but our friend, you know, da-da-da-da-da, you know, or even if it was just our friend and gesture, if you don't want to have to say our friend, this, you know them as X, you know, actually uses they, them pronouns.
Yeah.
And, yeah, rather than being like, hey, stop being an asshole, like, you know. So coming into it, or, you know, if you're creating an environment where someone is more likely to be able to admit, hey, I just didn't know, rather than you're accusing me of being, you know,
and
an asshole,
they're in a corner, you're in a corner.
Then it's very easy for them to kind of double down and be like, you know what, like, actually you're wrong, or actually I know this, or actually fuck you, and storm off. You know, because no learning and no growth really happens in those kind of defensive shutdown environments. I'm also a fan of being like, you know, in those situations where you said, like, you know, you don't feel qualified or whatever like that. This is my advice in all things, is just be honest about those things too.
Yeah.
And so be like, hey, we've gotten into terror, like, and even if you can, like, make a bit of a, you know, joke about it, it's like, I feel like we've gotten into territory where I'm totally not qualified to, like, know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Yeah.
How about we take a class trip to the internet and ask some people who do.
Yeah.
You know, like, any of those kind of tips and tricks about breaking down or lightening up interpersonal communication, like, is very helpful in these kind of situations.
Yeah.
As well.
No, that's good advice. Keep it light and keep it genuine in the space of actual, the intent is to learn, as opposed to just castrate people that get it wrong and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I guess also, like, from a growth point of view, knowing that if you are likely, or it seems that it's becoming more common, that you are getting into conversations like this where you do feel like you're getting out of your depth, going, maybe, I should go and do a little bit of upskilling, or maybe I should go and, chat with someone I know knows more and ask them if they've got some good resources or good tips, or whether it's okay to punt them their way.
Yeah.
Which is probably a lot of the time not, because they're already quite tired and have got a lot on their plate. And the more that you can do kind of as an ally or someone, who is in allyship with a marginalised group, to sort of not do that is helpful.
Yeah.
But again, it's a complex balance between balancing not speaking for a group and also not being like,
not pressure.
Wipe my hands of like knowing anything about anything, and let's just give it to the people who are already doing a huge amount of emotional labour and educational work, and are just really tired, often. Awesome. So knowing the good resources, like websites, because they don't require someone to actually do the work for you. Ahead of time is like pre-prepared is pre. There's, I'm sure there's some saying there. Is pre something.
Oh, you're checking with me.
There's a saying, but I always mangle them.
Have you put in the preparatory work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Thank you.
I'm also the one that did the spelling earlier.
Oh, good.
There's the.
See, I'll just punt that your way because I'm terrible at spelling.
What were you going to say, Tim?
I was going to say that I did see one on a triathlon T-shirt that was like, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So it's kind of that, but the other way around.
Oh,
yeah.
So treat trans allyship like a triathlon.
Yeah,
Prepare.
That's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway from this.
It's nice. Yeah,
it's so juicy talking to you, and I feel like there is so much more we could delve into, but I am aware that we should. We're
getting all the hand signals that mean
wrap up the conversation. Yeah, but I'm sure that we can deep dive with you another time as well, and you've provided some really great rabbit holes for other people to go down, and we'll put those all in the show notes, hey Tim?
That's right.
Yeah, so Rūrangi.com is one, and insideout.co.nz I think is another.
And I haven't even talked about 66.
Oh yeah, what do you wish you'd learned from your sex education? Can we squeeze that question?
Okay, I think the question that you were like, we might ask you this question, and it was about what did you get from a sex education, and I had a good one for that. Literally the only thing I can remember from my sex education in primary school and intermediate school, there is a lot of my gym teacher being super awkward and like whatever in high school sex education. So if we're just talking about primary and intermediate, is the external sex educator, so who's the one who came in rather than making a poor teacher have to do it. Mm-hmm. She brought a cush ball with her, and the thing which I think everyone else is learning for the rest of that year just stopped at this point that she said this, where she was like, actually no, now I think about the cush ball didn't have anything to do with it, but she talked about how the folds of a vagina are like the skin of a roly dog, and I think all of us were kind of like, those are some really weird like imagery there, and all of us now, you should be seeing my eyebrows and right now.
No, it's also
but
weird.
These are like year 5s or something like that, who are like even talking about like weird dogs, and talking like was gonna already cause a bit of a like distracted class. Like, so you put that plus 6 together, and it was just like...
Rolly dog. Because the rolly dog at the time was the icon for a particular brand of toilet paper.
I think that also added to the whole weird / ick factor of it. So any discussions about, hey, you know, like all kinds of people and all kinds of gender identities can have vaginas, didn't get anywhere near that conversation. It just, everything stopped.
Everything stopped at the mention of the rolly dog.
Like, didn't get anywhere near there for the next 20 years, I'm sure, but
well, we know
that's another.
We know to leave that out, I guess, of what I'm about to ask you, which is, of course, we are making a Sex and Space board game specifically with the intention to open conversations about sex, gender, bodies.
Well, it certainly closed it.
Yeah, but so we won't put anything about rolly dogs. But if you were picking up,
that's where the Crushball came in. There was
to
some weird sort of like fondling of the Cushball at the same time that these things were being said.
Right.
So it was just a whole clusterfuck of sex education. That
it's amazing what sticks in your mind.
Yeah, that's it. That's all I learned.
Well, I'm interested in if you were to open up this imaginary board game, which is still in the prototyping phase. But
it's a picture of the not underwear, toilet paper mascot and a Cushball.
Yeah, and that's
and
what's
the
in
word
the box
vagina
across the two of them, and that would be the game.
That's the game.
It's all you need to.
Because the game is working out what the fuck these
what
three
does
things
sex
mean.
A game of association. But if you open this game, what would you be? It's a trivia game. That's the format. What would you be delighted to see in there? What would you be like? Fuck yeah, these guys are getting it right.
Ooh. I feel like that's going to be the whole and they wasted our last 5 minutes of airtime with just sitting there trying to think of something. I'm going to have to come back to you on that one.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I shall email yous.
Great. We could put Cole's email suggestions into the, into the show notes as well.
I hope a giant thing being idea by Cole.
Yeah, great. Yeah, credit you.
Absolutely.
That's what you'd like to see.
All about
that's what you'd like to see.
Yourself my name and lights.
I've got that from you.
Screw all this education activist bullshit. It's really
neon signs.
It's about the neon signs.
Yeah.
And Rūrangi's just been picked up by Hulu, hey? This is the cool news.
I know. What is my life?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Where can people watch it? How can they watch it?
Well, if you're in the US, on Hulu. But in New Zealand, it will be on Neon in May.
Awesome.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Internationally, stay tuned.
Definitely.
Yes, of course, of course.
Rūrangi.com. We'll have those kind of updates.
Brilliant.
Yes,
and our Facebook page.
Yes, and you are not a walking website.
No. But I'm getting better at this social media-y promo stuff.
Cole, it's been such a delight to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been delightful being here, although a little bit hot, but that's all right. It's just you two.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Let's open the door.
Hey, we really, really hope you enjoyed that. If you want to check out more of Cole or his work, you could watch Shortland Street, but you can also check out the show notes. We'll put all those details there. Yeah, go check that out. As I mentioned before, this is episode 10. If you haven't heard episodes 1 through 9, go back and check those out. They're on any good podcast platform. They're also available on YouTube or through our website, sexandspace.com. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you want to share the love, give us any criticism or feedback, pitch some ideas, shout out some topics you want covered, or direct us to some people you think we should talk to. That would be amazing. Send us some emails and pictures, or anything else to hello@sexandspace.com. We'd also love a cheeky little follow on Facebook or Instagram, whatever your preference. You can find us at sexandspace.com. That's sexanspace, DOTCOM. If you so desired, Apple Podcasts is a great place to give us a lovely little review. They really, really help. And we appreciate them massively. Huge thanks, as always, to all our guests, Clive at Factory Studios, the team at String Theory, to Andrew, Tanya, Brandon, David and Richard for their amazing voices, and super special thanks to my amazing co-host Jess Holly Bates, and thank you to you for making it all the way to the end. Join us on episode 11. Bye.
If you found some of this material a little challenging, keep coming back and we'll make it really challenging.